Hello everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Darkveil. Today we're covering 5 of the most disturbing true trucker stories ever sent into this channel. Truckers sent these in, and none of this reads like fiction dressed up as fact. Too specific, too consistent, too unsettling to dismiss. We cross-check the details, and they line up with dispatch logs. Before we get into it, one driver started timing her runs around something that should never have been standing where it was. Another swears 2 seconds were enough to change the way he sees every overpass since. And one wave, one ordinary, friendly wave, still keeps a newer driver up some nights. Please subscribe, turn the bell on, because this channel is about slow-burning authentic horror over cheap jump scares. And if you've got your own story, drop it in the comments. Your story may be the next one we uncover. Let's get into it. 15 years I've been driving interstate freight, mostly the I-80 corridor between Nebraska and Iowa, the kind of stretch where the horizon doesn't change for 200 miles, and the radio starts talking back to you around hour 6 whether you want it to or not. You learn things about yourself out there that you don't learn anywhere else. You learn how quiet your own head gets. You learn how much you talk to a windshield full of nothing. And you learn, eventually, that the road has its own memory, whether you want it to or not. Winter runs are the hardest, and somehow the ones I remember best. The cab gets small. The world gets white. The visibility drops until you're driving mostly by feel, and by the reflectors ticking past on the shoulder. I want to tell you about mile marker 218, the overpass just past the county line on that Nebraska stretch, because for the better part of a year, that spot took something out of me that I don't think I ever fully got back. I want to be clear that I'm not a nervous driver. 15 years, no major accidents, no points on my license worth mentioning, the kind of record that gets you the good freight and the trust of dispatchers who don't usually trust anybody. I say that because what happened at that overpass isn't the kind of thing I go around telling people, and when I do tell it, I need them to understand it isn't coming from someone who spooks easy. The first time I saw him, I genuinely didn't think twice. It was maybe 2 in the morning, deep January, a light snow coming down that wasn't sticking yet, and there was a man standing at the rail of the overpass, hood up, hands not visible, facing north into the wind. Truckers see people out at strange hours on stretches like that. Hitchhikers who misjudged how far the next town was. Guys who got kicked out of a car after an argument and are waiting on a ride that isn't coming. A maintenance worker doing something with the drainage or the guardrail bolts at an hour that made no sense to me, but plenty of sense to a county work order I wasn't privy to. I clocked him, the way you clock anything out of the ordinary on a night run, filed it away, and kept rolling at 55 into the dark. The second time was maybe 5 days later, same week, different run, same overpass, and here's the thing that snagged on me even though I tried to let it go. Same stance. Not just a man standing there again, but the exact same posture, hood up, facing the same direction, like a photograph somebody had taped to the world. I remember thinking, well, maybe it's the same guy. Maybe he lives near there. Maybe he's got some reason to be out at that hour that has nothing to do with me and none of my business. I've told myself bigger lies than that one and believed them longer. The third time is the one that actually put a hook in me. It was a whiteout, the kind where your wipers can't keep up and your high beams just bounce the snow back at you, so you switch to low and drive by faith. And the wind was hard enough that it was shoving my empty trailer sideways in the lane, forcing me to fight the wheel just to hold 40. And there he was. Same spot, same stance, standing dead upright in wind that had me white-knuckled at highway speed in 80,000 pounds of steel. Nobody stands straight up in a gust like that. You lean into it, you brace, you turn your shoulder into it at minimum. He didn't so much as sway. That was the first night I didn't sleep right afterward. I got to the yard, backed into my slot, sat in the cab for a good 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside and lie down. After that, I started timing my runs around him. And I want to be honest about how much effort that took, because it tells you something about how deep this had already gotten into me. I'd burned 20, 30 minutes of dead time at a truck stop outside Lincoln, nursing coffee I didn't want, just so I'd cross 218 in daylight, instead of at 3 in the morning. I told my dispatcher I liked the sunrise better on that stretch, which is the kind of thing you say when you don't want to say the real thing out loud, not even to yourself. Some weeks I'd take the longer route entirely, eating into my hours, costing myself money, just to avoid 100 yards of overpass on a public highway. That's not rational behavior. I knew it wasn't rational behavior while I was doing it, and I did it anyway, because some part of me that doesn't negotiate had already decided that spot wasn't right. What really got under my skin, though, came over the CB, almost by accident. I mentioned the guy on the overpass to a driver named Dutch, who's run that lane longer than I have, 20-some years. The kind of guy who's seen everything the interstate has to offer and stopped being impressed by most of it a long time ago. He went quiet on the radio for a second, which from Dutch is saying something, and then he told me he'd never once seen anybody standing on 218. Not once. And he ran that stretch 4 or 5 nights a week, had for 2 decades. I asked around after that, made a project out of it without really meaning to. A woman named Reyes who hauls reefer freight through there. A couple of other regulars whose names I only know from the radio. Nobody had seen him. Not one of them. Dozens of us on that road every week, in every kind of weather. And it was just me. I sat with that for a while before I did anything about it. Because there's a difference between being spooked and being crazy, and I wasn't ready to find out which one I was. Eventually, I called a friend of mine who used to work dispatch for the county roads department, and I asked her, half embarrassed, to check if there'd ever been bridge work scheduled at 218, any maintenance record, any reason at all for a man to be posted there at 3 in the morning in the dead of January. She humored me, called me back 2 days later, and said there was nothing. No work order for that mile marker going back years. No maintenance history. No incident report. No accident report. Nothing on file that would explain a person having any legitimate business standing on that overpass, in any weather, at any hour, ever. As far as the county was concerned, nobody had any business being there at all. The night that still climbs up my spine, the one I still can't talk about without my hands doing something involuntary, came in February. An ice storm glazed the whole corridor that night, the bad kind, where the road looks wet under your headlights until the second your tires hit it, and you realize it's glass. I got forced onto the shoulder near 218 when my trailer started fishtailing under me. No warning, just gone, and I fought it down to a stop, with my heart trying to climb out through my throat. I sat there with my hazards going, engine running, breathing hard, and when I finally looked up through the windshield, he was there. Maybe 60 yards off. Same as always. I got out of the truck. I still don't fully know why. Some combination of adrenaline and a need to prove to myself that he was just a man. Cold and stranded, same as anybody else. Out on a night like that. Somebody I could maybe help. I walked toward him across ice that had my boots sliding with every step, and I got close enough, maybe 30 feet, to see him clearly under the weak orange light the overpass throws down. And that's when I noticed the thing that I still can't explain, and still can't unsee. It was maybe 28, 30 degrees, ice coating every surface, and everything alive out there that night, me included, was fogging the air in front of its face with every breath. He wasn't. Nothing. No fog, no movement in his chest. Nothing. I stood there on that ice for what felt like a full minute, and I never saw him breathe once. I don't remember getting back in the truck. I remember the door slamming and my hands shaking too hard to get the key turned, and I remember sitting there until a tow truck the county sent for a jackknifed rig further up found me and asked if I needed help too. Almost a year later, an old-timer at a diner outside Council Bluffs overheard me telling the story to another driver and pulled up a chair at my booth without waiting to be asked, the way old truckers sometimes do. He said guys had been talking about a man on that overpass on and off since before I ever got my license. Always the same description, hood up, facing north, never moving. He said he'd heard a version of it from a driver who'd since retired, and another version from a woman who quit the road entirely not long after her own encounter. He said something else too, something that sat heavier with me than the sighting itself. Every driver he'd ever heard tell that story firsthand had gone on to have a serious close call at that exact mile marker within the year. A blowout at speed. A jackknife. One driver who put his rig into the guardrail hard enough to total it. He said it easy, like diner talk, like he only half believed it himself, but something in his eyes told me he believed it more than he was letting on. 3 weeks after that conversation, another ice storm rolled through, another 3 a.m. run, and I came up on 218, already tense, already watching the rail, before I was even close enough to see it clearly, and it was empty. First time in almost a year that Overpass didn't have him standing on it. I remember feeling a wave of relief wash through me. Actual physical relief. My shoulders dropping for maybe 4 seconds, before my trailer caught a sheet of black ice I never saw coming, and slammed the whole rig sideways into the guardrail, hard enough to spin me half around in the lane. When it finally stopped, engine ticking, hands shaking too bad to grab the wheel again, I was staring straight down the length of that overpass. It took me a minute, sitting there in the wreckage of my own composure, to notice exactly where I'd come to rest. Dead center, under the overpass. Facing north, the same spot, the same direction he used to stand. I still run that lane, still cross 218, 4 or 5 nights a week, because it's my route and my living, and I'm not willing to let 100 yards of highway take that from me. I haven't seen him since that night, but I think about that old-timer and the way he said other drivers went quiet after their own close call too, like it wasn't something meant to be explained, only passed along, driver to driver, the way you pass along a warning about a bad patch of road or a speed trap nobody talks about on the radio. And some nights, coming up on that overpass in the dark, with the snow coming sideways across my high beams, I catch myself checking the rail before I even mean to, half hoping he's not there, half afraid that the next time somebody sees a man standing up on 218, facing north in the middle of an ice storm, not breathing, not moving, waiting on nothing at all, it's going to be me. I've been driving nights for about 8 years now, mostly hauling parts and produce between El Paso and Albuquerque, cutting through a string of nothing towns in New Mexico that don't even rate a stoplight. You get to know a route like that the way you know your own house in the dark. Every dip in the asphalt, every place the shoulder crumbles a little, every mile marker that's been shot up by some bored teenager with a rifle, and you get to know the blind spots. There's one particular overpass, maybe 40 minutes outside of town, so small I won't bother naming it, that's used mostly by ATV riders cutting across the desert during the day. At night, it's just a slab of concrete over an empty stretch of road, and because of the angle, your headlights lose the top of it for about 2 seconds before you actually pass underneath. So I check it early, out of habit, the same way you check a mirror before you change lanes. That night, I checked it. Nothing. Confirmed empty, the way it always is. 2 seconds later, in the reflection off my windshield, there was somebody standing on top of it. Not walking, not climbing up, just standing, like they'd been there the whole time and I'd missed them. By the time I came out the other side and checked my mirror, there was nothing up there at all. I told myself it was exhaustion, that I'd been staring at asphalt too long, and I let it go until I got to the yard and pulled the SD card out of my dash cam, because the company makes us log a clip every trip for insurance. The 2 seconds I needed weren't corrupted, exactly. They were gone, clean cut, one timestamp to the next, like somebody had spliced the footage. That camera had never once glitched on me before or since. I didn't say anything to anybody for a couple weeks. Then I brought it up at a truck stop outside Deming, half joking, testing the water. 2 guys who've been running these roads longer than I've been alive went quiet, and then one of them just said, "The overpass by Higgins turnoff," before I'd even told him which one. Turns out, there's a small, unspoken list of guys who've seen something in that same 2-second gap, going back at least 15 years. Nobody talks about it, because nobody wants to be the guy who talks about it. That's what got me digging. I asked around at the diner in the little town nearby, and an old woman who'd lived there her whole life told me that Overpass wasn't originally built for ATVs at all. It went up over what used to be a rail spur, decommissioned back in the 70s. After a work crew accident nobody liked to discuss much. She didn't know details, just that men had died out there before the road ever existed in its current form, and that the ground had a reputation long before anybody was riding four-wheelers over it. I could have left it at that, but I couldn't. A friend of mine works at the gas station about half a mile down from the overpass, and they've got an old security camera bolted to the awning that catches a wide angle of the highway whenever a truck's headlights sweep past. I asked him to pull footage from a night I knew I'd be running that stretch, and there it was, from a completely different angle than my own windshield, a shape standing on that rail at the exact same window of time. Not a reflection, not glare. Something an outside camera, pointed the other direction, had also caught. At that point, I stopped trying to explain it away and started trying to actually understand it, which might have been the mistake. I noticed every account I could dig up happened on hot, still nights, the kind where the blacktop holds the day's heat long after dark, and the air over the road does that shimmer thing even at 2 in the morning. I figured, fine, some kind of mirage, heat distortion, doing something to a real person walking out there. Rational enough. Then I cross-referenced the dates against the local paper's archive and found a missing persons report. A man last seen walking in that direction on a night with the same weather pattern, never found. The report described him, build, age, what he'd been wearing when he disappeared, and I recognized it because it matched a guy I used to know. A driver who ran this exact route years before I ever picked it up, who quit trucking not long before I started, and never gave anybody a straight answer about why he switched off nights. I couldn't leave it alone after that. I got a buddy to ride with me. 2 dash cams this time, his phone propped against the windshield facing up and out. We hit the overpass together, both of us looking dead at it. He swears to this day he saw nothing at all, but his phone picked up 2 seconds of something on the audio. Not words exactly, just a sound that wasn't engine noise and wasn't wind. I saw the same figure I'd seen before, except this time it moved, just barely, turning its head like it had noticed me looking, right before the concrete blocked it from view. A few months after that, I told my dispatcher I wasn't running that stretch anymore. No explanation, just wouldn't do it. They swapped it to another driver, a younger guy who needed the hours. 3 weeks later, his rig turned up, pulled onto the shoulder, just past that overpass. Engine still running, door open, no sign of him anywhere. They never found him. I still drive nights. I just take the long way now, even though it cost me almost an hour, and the company's asked me twice why I keep burning extra fuel on that route. I don't have an answer for them that doesn't sound insane, so I just tell them I like the scenery better. But if you ask me what I think happened to that kid, or to the driver before me, or what exactly stood on that overpass for 2 seconds at a time, it had no business being there. I don't have anything for you either. I just know I checked. It was empty, and then it wasn't. I've been driving produce for about 3 years now, mostly back roads through farm country, the kind of routes that don't show up right on GPS unless you already know where the turns are. Pre-dawn starts, empty highways, coffee that's gone cold by the second exit. You get used to being alone out there. You stop noticing it, really, until something makes you notice it again. It was early autumn, the kind of morning where the fog sits low over the fields and doesn't burn off until 8 or 9. I was running a route I'd done maybe 40 times before, out past the county line where the road dips under an old overpass, one of those leftover structures from back when the state was going to punch a new highway through and then just didn't. Nobody uses that overpass. It doesn't connect to anything anymore. The road underneath still runs, but the concrete up top just sits there, going nowhere. That morning, coming up on it in the fog, I saw a man standing at the rail, just standing there, hand up, waving. Not frantic, not urgent, plain as that. The kind of wave you'd give a neighbor backing out of his driveway. And because I'd been driving 3 years and 10,000 mornings just like it, my arm came off the wheel, and I waved back before I'd even thought about it. Didn't process a single thing about what I'd just seen until I was already past the overpass, and the fog had folded it up behind me. That's when it landed. There's no way up onto that overpass. Not anymore. The state fenced off both approach roads years back when they killed the project. Chain link, with the no trespassing signs rusted soft at the edges. Weeds grown up through the gate. No ladder, no service road. Nothing a man could climb without cutting his hands open on old wire. I checked my mirror out of habit more than anything, not really expecting to see through fog that thick at that distance anyway. But there was no shape up there at all. Not walking off. Not crouched down out of sight. Nothing. Just gone. In the 2 or 3 seconds it took me to register what I'd seen and put my eyes back on the road. I told myself the fog did that. Swallowed him up the way fog does. I believed it enough to keep driving. I didn't believe it enough to stop thinking about it the rest of that run. Weeks went by. I ran that route a dozen more times, same hour, same fog when the season gave it to me. Nothing. No man, no wave. I'd almost talked myself into calling it tired eyes, the way your brain builds a shape out of nothing when you've been staring at gray road for 2 hours straight. Then I was at a truck stop off Route 9, waiting on my order, and there was an old-timer on the next stool, the kind of guy who's been driving so long he doesn't wait for you to ask before he starts talking. Weather, diesel prices, and then out of nowhere he brought up that same overpass. Said it like he'd been carrying it around and just needed a place to set it down. Told me there used to be a driver who ran that stretch decades back, before the state pulled the project, and the man was known up and down that road for waving at every rig that passed under him while he worked. Said he died right there one foggy morning, brakes or his heart. Nobody was ever real sure. And for years after, other drivers swore they still saw somebody up on that overpass, waving, same as always. I didn't tell him what I'd seen. I just nodded and let him talk. And when my order came up, I paid and left, and told myself it was just something old men say at counters, because the road gets long and quiet otherwise. That should have been the end of it. I wanted it to be the end of it. But 2 months later, I was parked at a different stop further north, talking to a guy I'd known a few years, somebody who'd run that county longer than I'd been alive, and I brought it up careful, like I was just asking about weather. He knew the story too, except in his version the driver had a different name, it happened in a different decade, and the man died in his sleeper cab, not on the roadside. Same overpass, same waving. Either somebody along the way had gotten the details wrong, or there was never one true version to get right in the first place. That sat worse with me than the first telling had. A ghost story you can shrug off. A story that keeps changing shape every time somebody hands it to you. That one's harder to put down, because it means something's being kept alive out there, even if nobody agrees anymore on what it actually is. I didn't go looking into it past that. Didn't pull old newspapers. Didn't ask the company office. Didn't drive out there in broad daylight just to check the fence line myself. Some part of me didn't want an answer bad enough to go find one. Then this past spring, I was at my mother's place, helping her clear out my father's things. He'd passed a couple years back, and we finally got around to the garage. Found a box of his old paperwork from before I was born. Log books, faded route sheets, a company patch from a hauling outfit that folded sometime in the 80s. My mother, going through it beside me, mentioned offhand that he used to run produce through that same county before I ever came along, same kind of back roads I run now, and that he always waved at every driver he passed. Said it was good luck. Said a man alone on the road needs to know somebody else is out there too. I asked her, careful, if he'd ever run the old highway spur, the one that dead ends at that overpass nobody finished. She thought about it a second and said probably. That whole stretch used to be the only way through before the new road came in. I didn't ask her anything else after that. Didn't need to, and honestly didn't want to know any more than what she'd already given me. I still run that route most mornings. Still hit that overpass right around first light when the fog's thick enough to swallow the guardrail whole. Haven't seen the wave again. But if I do, I already know my hand's going up, and this time it won't be reflex. I've hauled freight over Wolf Creek Pass for going on 4 years now, long enough that dispatch stopped assigning it to anyone else whenever the forecast turned bad. Switchbacks don't rattle me. 11% grades don't rattle me. What used to make me roll my eyes was the talk on Channel 19 about the overpass near mile marker 44, the one every driver on that stretch calls the Watcher's Bridge. You'd hear it start the second the spring fog rolled down through the cuts, when the snowmelt turns the low spots into rivers of mist, sitting right at headlight height. Some driver running on no sleep would key up and say he saw a man standing under that overpass, just standing there in the wet dark, watching the trucks go under. Somebody else would laugh and tell him to lay off the caffeine pills. It got passed around like a dare. Run that stretch enough times, sooner or later you'll see him too. I'd been running it 3 years and never saw a thing but rock and rebar, and I figured that was that. Then one night in late May, fog thick enough that my wipers couldn't keep up, I came around the bend before the bridge and there he was. Standing off to the side, one arm tucked into his jacket like it wasn't working right, watching the road, same as the stories said. I only had him in my lights for maybe 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I caught something nobody on that radio had ever mentioned. A tattoo. On his forearm. Hand poked. A compass rose gone the color of an old bruise. Nobody tells that detail on the CB. Nobody knows to. I sat with my hands shaking on the wheel for a mile before I keyed up and told the truck behind me what I'd seen. I hadn't even gotten to the tattoo when a voice I didn't recognize cut in and said it for me. Said it like he was reading it off a card. Compass rose. Left forearm. Blue-green ink. A driver I'd never spoken to in my life, describing something I hadn't said out loud yet. That's when it stopped being a story I could shrug off. I started asking around at the truck stops, at the scale house, anybody who'd worked that road longer than me. Nobody could tell me where the Watcher started. No accident report on file for that overpass. No name attached to anything. Just years of drivers seeing the same man, the same stillness, some of them describing that same tattoo down to the color, and not one record anywhere to explain why. My father drove this pass before me, for almost 20 years, before his heart gave out in a rest stop outside Durango. After I started asking questions, I went through the box of his things I'd never opened, and found his old logbooks stacked at the bottom. In the margins of one from before I was born, in his handwriting, 3 words, saw him again. Mile 44, and under it, a pencil sketch, rough but unmistakable. The same compass rose. That sketch was drawn a decade before I ever picked up a CB mic, before the dare, before the chain letter version of the story existed at all. Whatever this was, it didn't start as a joke passed between bored drivers. It started somewhere further back, and somehow it had been waiting for me specifically. I tracked down a man named Earl who used to run team routes with my dad in the early years, retired now, living outside Pagosa Springs. I showed him the sketch, and his face changed before I even asked the question. He told me my father used to drive that pass with a partner, a younger guy, and one whiteout night that partner's rig went off the grade near the bridge. They never recovered him from the ravine. The county called it unrecoverable terrain and left it at that. Earl said that partner had gotten that same tattoo poked into his arm at a truck stop the week before it happened, doing it himself with a sewing needle and bottle ink like guys did back then. And he said my father was the one driving behind him that night, the one who radioed it in, the one who never talked about it again, not once, not to anybody, for the rest of his life. I didn't know any of that. My father never said a word of it to me. I ran the pass again 3 weeks later, same kind of fog, same stretch of road. I told myself I wasn't looking for him, and I was lying to myself the whole climb. He was there again, same spot, same stillness. But this time, right as I passed under the bridge, he lifted the arm that wasn't tucked into his jacket and pointed down the road ahead of me. I eased off before I even understood why, and that's the only reason I saw the jackknifed flatbed sitting sideways across both lanes in time to stop. I sat there afterward with my hazards on, engine running, and looked in my mirror. Nothing under that overpass but wet concrete and fog moving through like it always does. I never called it in. I don't know what I would have said. What stays with me isn't the tattoo anymore, or the sling, or even the warning. It's the way he stood, weight shifted off one side, shoulder held a certain way. My father used to stand exactly like that on bad days, when the old shoulder injury he never explained was acting up. Nobody's ever found a name to put to the man on that bridge. Nobody's ever explained why the detail always matches, why it started before the story did, why it found its way to me, and not some other driver running that same road. I still don't have an answer. I just know I stopped noticing the fog different now, every time I come up on mile 44. 35 years I drove this coast road, and in all that time, I kept one rule that never bent, not once. Never stop for a man standing alone on the shoulder after dark. Every driver who's been at this long enough either learns that rule from someone else or learns it the hard way themselves, and I got mine from an old-timer named Pruitt, back when I still thought the CB was good for nothing but jokes and late-night gospel stations. He told me, pulling over for a stranger at 2 in the morning is like opening your door to something you can't shut again. I carried that rule through 3.5 decades of runs, through blown tires and iced highways, and every kind of weather this coast can throw at a man. Then came a Tuesday in October, close to the end of what I already knew would be one of my last big hauls, before I turned in my keys for good. And I broke that rule, without hardly thinking about it at all. The rain had been coming down steady since sundown, the kind that doesn't storm, just commits to falling, and doesn't let up. I was maybe 40 minutes from the yard, running along the coastal stretch where the road dips under an old concrete overpass. And that's where I saw him, standing dead center under the overpass, out of the worst of it, hands in his coat pockets, not waving, not doing anything you'd expect from a man trying to get picked up, just standing there like he was waiting on a bus that ran on a schedule only he knew. I don't know what made me ease off the brake and pull the rig onto the shoulder. Might have been the thought of my own boy, out there somewhere doing God knows what, and how I'd want somebody to stop for him. Might have just been tired. Either way, I told him to hop in, and he did, quiet and polite, dripping onto my floor mats, thanking me twice before he'd even shut the door. I asked him where he was headed, and he told me the name of the next exit before I'd said a word about which way I was going, or what road we were even on. I figured he'd seen my company markings, maybe knew this route from riding with someone else before, so I let it go. We talked easy after that. Nothing you'd call a real conversation, just the kind of small talk you make with somebody killing time in a moving truck. Then, somewhere in the middle of nothing, he asked me how many years I had left before I hung it up. I hadn't told him I was retiring, hadn't said a word about it. I told myself he'd probably clocked the countdown calendar taped to my dash, the one my wife made me to cross off the days, and maybe he had, but it sat wrong with me for a second longer than it should have. About 10 minutes on, the CB crackled to life with another driver's voice, going on about a missing hiker some family had reported near this same stretch, said the sheriff's office had put a notice out a few nights back. I glanced over at my passenger without meaning to. He didn't react at all, just kept looking out at the rain, like the words hadn't reached him. And I remember thinking that was strange enough to notice, then telling myself plenty of people don't react to a stranger's bad luck on the radio. When we got close to where he needed to get off, he asked me to let him out, at an exit that hadn't existed in years. The state closed that ramp, back before I even started driving this route. Guardrail up, whole thing grown over. I told him that, gentle as I could. Figured he was confused, tired. Maybe not from around here anymore. But he described the place like he'd walked it that morning. A diner that used to sit right off that ramp. Said the name of it plain as anything. I knew that diner. My father used to stop there before it burned down in the 70s. I hadn't heard anybody say its name out loud in 40 years. And this man said it like it was still open for business. Somewhere around then, I noticed his coat was dry. Not damp, not drying out from the cab heat. Dry. Like it had never touched the rain at all. and I'd watched him standing under that overpass from a good 100 yards off before I ever pulled over, out past the edge where the concrete stopped covering the shoulder. I told myself the wind must have been blowing the rain the other way, or maybe I hadn't gotten as good a look as I thought. A man convinces himself of plenty of things at the end of a long shift. I found him an exit that actually existed, pulled onto the ramp, and let him out same as I would anybody. He thanked me a third time, said it plain, said, "Thank you, Frank," and pulled the door shut behind him. I sat there with my hands on the wheel for longer than I want to admit, because I never told him my name. Wasn't on my jacket that night. Wasn't on anything he could have seen from the passenger seat. I told myself he must have heard me answer the CB somewhere along the ride. Must have caught it without me noticing. And I pulled back onto the road. Because that's what you do. You keep driving. Back at the yard 2 nights later, I pulled the dashcam footage, mostly out of habit, since company policy wants it kept on file a few weeks in case of a claim. The footage showed the cab, the rain on the windshield, my own hands on the wheel, and an empty passenger seat the entire ride. No man, no shape, nothing, but the seatbelt hanging where it always hangs. I want to say the camera glitched, and maybe it did. Cameras do that, especially the cheap ones fleet management installs and never replaces. But I sat in that break room a long while, just staring at an empty seat, where I know for a fact a man had been sitting. I couldn't let it drop after that, so I asked around, the way you do when something's chewing at you and you need somebody else to tell you it's nothing. There's a waitress at a truck stop off that coast road who's been serving that counter longer than I've been driving, and when I described the man, calm as I could manage, she went quiet a second and told me a hiker went missing off that same stretch back in the early 90s. Never found. Family gave up, looking after a couple years. She said drivers used to talk about somebody matching that same look showing up in cabs late at night for a while after. Always polite, always let out at the next exit, always saying thank you to the driver by name before he ever gave it. She said everybody figured it was just a story. Truckers tell each other to stay awake on long nights. And she said it the way you say something you don't quite believe, and don't quite not believe either. What got me wasn't the story itself. It was that, when I looked up the old newspaper clipping on my phone, right there at the counter, the missing hiker's name printed plain in the article was Frank, my name. Not a family member, not anybody I'd ever heard of, just a stranger who happened to share it, which happens. Names repeat all the time. There's nothing strange about a common name showing up twice in one lifetime. Still, sitting there with cold coffee in front of me, I checked the date on that clipping against my logbook without really deciding to, and the day that hiker went missing was the same date, the same Tuesday in October, 30 years apart almost to the hour I picked a man up under that overpass. I told myself, and I still tell myself, that dates repeat, names repeat, cameras glitch, and a tired man standing in the rain can look dry if you didn't get as good a look as you remember getting. I've turned it over more nights than I'd like to admit, and I've never once let myself land on an answer. Because the second you decide something like that is real, you have to live different. And I've got a wife and a house and a pension I'd like to enjoy in peace. Easier, and maybe truer, to say he was just a man. Tired, a little strange, good at reading a stranger's dashboard, and lucky enough, or unlucky enough, to share a dead man's name. Last week I ran that same coastal route for what's likely the final time, before I hand my keys over for good. Same time of year, same kind of rain, coming down steady instead of hard. I came up on that overpass doing the speed limit, heater running, radio low, and there was a man standing under it, same as before, hands in his pockets, not waving, just waiting. I slowed down some, without deciding to. I don't know yet what I'm going to tell you I did. Maybe he was just a man,